And we'll hopefully finish up Romans 11 next week. So, because I got it broken down in 3 different parts here. So we're gonna cover verses 11 through 25 today. And first time when we did it a couple weeks ago, we did the first 10 verses, and we talked about how Israel's rejection was not total. That not everybody, not all the Jews were rejecting it. That there were a lot of Jewish believers that came to faith and stuff, and so that while it looked like it was complete rejection, it wasn't. Okay, now this part of the chapter, Paul's going to talk about that it's not final. Their rejection is not final, and stuff. He's going to talk a lot about coming back to the faith, and or what the rejection looks like at first, and then what could happen later on and stuff. And so we're gonna go ahead and jump into this, okay? But like we said in the first part of the chapter, is that there's always a remnant. God always has a remnant of believers that He sets aside. We saw it in the example of Elijah a couple weeks ago, that when we were talking about it, that there's Elijah thought he was the only one left, but there was actually several thousand that hadn't bowed to Baal, and God told him that, and He said, "You're not the only one." And so sometimes it feels like we're the only one out here, but we're not. There are lots of people. There's always a remnant of people, and it's the same thing with the Jewish believers. Is that there's always a remnant of Jews that will be even through to the very end days. So we see the 144,000 in Revelation. They'll be proclaiming the good news during the last days, and in the great tribulation and stuff. And so so now we'll read 11 through 25, and we'll talk about this section of it, and then, like I say, next week hopefully we'll finish it up. All right, verse 11. I say then, have they stumbled that they shouldn't fall? Certainly not. But through their fall, to provoke them to jealousy, salvation has come to the Gentiles. Now, if their fall is riches for the world, and their failure riches for the Gentiles, how much more their fullness? For I speak to you Gentiles, inasmuch as I am an apostle to the Gentiles. I magnify my ministry, if by any means I may provoke to jealousy those who are my flesh, and save some of them. For it is being cast away into the reckoning of the world. For it is being cast away. Okay, let me try this again. For if their being cast away is the reckoning of the world, what will their acceptance be but life after death? Life from the dead. But if their first fruit is holy, the lump is also holy. And if the root is holy, so are the branches. And if some of the branches are broken off, and you being a wild olive tree were grafted in among them, and with them become a partaker of the root and fatness of the olive tree. Do not boast against the branches, but if you do boast, remember that you do not support the root, but the root supports you. You will say then, branches were broken off, that I may be grafted in. Well said, because of unbelief they were broken off. And you stand by faith. Do not be haughty, but fear. For if God did not spare the Jews, or the natural branches, He will not spare you either. Therefore consider the goodness and severity of God, and those who fell, severity, but toward you goodness. If you continue in His goodness, otherwise you will also be cut off. And they also, if they do not continue in unbelief, they will be grafted in, for God is able to graft them in again. For if you were cut out of the olive tree, which is wild by nature, and grafted contrary to nature into a cultivated olive tree, how much more will these who were natural branches be grafted into their own olive tree? For I do not desire, brethren, that you should be ignorant of this mystery, lest you should be wise in your own opinion, and blindness in part has happened to Israel until the fullness of the Gentiles has come in. All right. Anybody confused yet? Little explanation. All right. Well, that's why I'm here. Oh no. So, basically, just to kind of sum it up, what Paul's saying here is that he's representing that faith is like an olive tree, and Jesus used the same analogy as the vine when he was talking to the disciples. Okay, and what Paul's saying here is that God is that the salvation, he's using an olive tree here as a representative of salvation, and that we all are part of this olive tree. Okay, and that the root system and the branch and the support is God and salvation, and that it was originally made for the Jewish people, God's chosen people. And so that they were part of basically the trunk area and stuff, and they expanded up into the branches, that they were part of the support and growth of the tree and things like that. But the branches that they became or should have become didn't believe. The Jews didn't accept. So they got broken off from the olive tree. And because of that, the Gentiles were given the opportunity to have salvation, to partake in this salvation. There's a few reasons. We're going to talk about some of them here in a couple minutes. But just to finish out this analogy here, okay, basically God removed the branches, the unbelieving branches, or the unbelieving people from the tree. So they were branches in the tree, and he removed them. And then he grafted in Gentiles, which in a lot of ways the Jews would have been extremely upset about and jealous, because now the Gentiles are getting the same opportunity that the Jews had, salvation. And so, but the Jews would have been upset that the Gentiles are getting the same one. And so they would be, because they felt that they were so much better than the Gentiles. And so they would be upset and they would be jealous. And that's kind of what God's going. It's kind of what Paul's saying should happen here, is that this should provoke them to jealousy, should provoke them to want to get back right with God and be back in the family of God again and be grafted back into the tree. Okay? He's saying here that God can graft in whoever accepts the message. Gentile or Jew, doesn't matter. Amen. And then he's also saying down here further where he tells the Gentiles, don't boast about this, because just as easily as God took the Jews out of this because they were, not living right and not doing right and not believing and not acting and whatever, and that they didn't want to believe. If you're going to boast about it and think that you're better than whatever, because there's no room for arrogance. There is no room for arrogance and living for God at the same time. Yeah. None whatsoever. And so what he's saying is that it was so easy. It was easy for God to pull and to remove branches of the Jewish nation. It's going to be just as easy for him to remove Gentile, especially when, as he's saying here, is that the Gentiles came from a wild olive tree and got grafted into a natural olive tree, because that's the way that the Jews would have looked at it. And so now it'd be easy to take the wildness back out of the tree, and because it didn't originally belong there. Okay, but if it stays and we do right and we stay grafted in with God and we stay building our relationship, then you won't be able to tell that we're any different than any of the rest of the tree. You won't be able to, you'll be able to see that it all looks the same. Every bit of it. And so, and that's what he's saying here. That's what he's saying is that God will graft you back in, will graft you in, but he'll also remove you if you fall away, if you don't. And so you get a lot of people that read passages like this and say, oh, well, it's possible to lose your salvation. Okay, well, let's maybe address that in some way here. Okay, it's not what this is saying. Not what this is saying. You can fall away, but if you're as Jesus did, and I want to go to John 15 here in a minute and look at that passage where Jesus is talking about the vine. If you're part of the tree and you're not healthy branch on a tree, what's going to happen? What do you do if you got a dead limb on a tree? You cut it off, you break it off, you cut it off, you remove it because it's going to hurt the rest of the tree. Okay? God's not going to allow his tree or his vine to be hurt by those that are not. So, not going to lose your salvation. Okay? Well, salvation is once for all. But the caveat to that is, and this is how I stand on this, okay? Yeah, you can't lose your salvation. But if you're willing, and I know we all have times where we're not as close to God as we should be, and we need to be closer, and we need to be whatever. But if you get to a point where yes, you may have said, yeah, I believe, I accept Christ, you were baptized, you joined the church, you were going regularly, and then all of a sudden something happened in your life and you completely turned your back on God and started denying his existence and everything like that. Okay, how was your relationship to start with? Were you really serious? Were you building that relationship? Did you just do it as a ticket to get to heaven? Because that's what a lot of people do, is they'll accept God, they'll accept Christ just so I can go to heaven. And then I'm going to go live how I want for the rest of my life. And yet I'm still going to go to heaven. Well, it's not the way it works. If you don't have a change of heart, then, I wouldn't want to risk that. Because when you're standing before the holy God, the one and only holy God, on Judgment Day, do you really want to risk that because you went forward during an invitation and accepted God, but then didn't have anything to do with him the rest of your life? Do you really want to think that you're saved and risk that? Or do you want to, like you would do with any other relationship, if you had a friend or a significant other in your life that you wanted to get to know more, aren't you going to spend time with them?
Right. You got to talk.
Right. You got to talk. You're going to spend time with him. You're going to learn about him. You're going to see it. If you go and just say, yeah, I'll be your friend, or I'll be your boyfriend or girlfriend or whatever, and then you don't talk to him ever, what kind of relationship is that? It's not. It's not. And so and that's kind of what with the way I view this is that, yeah, you don't lose your salvation unless you never really had it to begin with.
Right.
And so, yes, you can, okay, you're there. And this is, he says here that those that are grafted in are done by faith. So if your faith is strong and powerful, then you're grafted into the tree, whether you're a Gentile or a Jew, it don't matter. But if you're not living and acknowledging him and not spending that time with him and making that effort, then you're going to be cast away. You're going to be cut away. But the good part of this is Okay? As we know, we can be prodigal. We don't want to be prodigal. It's not what we're going for here. But if you do have a point in your life, because we all have times in our lives where things happen and we may question, we may doubt, we may things are hard and they're breaking us down, and the enemy is just ruthlessly attacking us and trying to get us to forego our faith or everything. And so there may be a time where we kind of walk away, we're not as close to God as we should be or whatever. Okay? But the beauty of it is that God can bring you back. Or you can come back to God, and when you do, He's going to put you right back into the tree where you belong and start growing again. Start getting that nourishment from the root system. Start getting it from the trunk, and start, so that's what Paul's saying here is that he's saying it's not final. You still have a chance. As long as you're sucking air on this side of the ground, you got a chance. It's when you stop sucking air that you got a problem if you haven't chosen to be with God. And so that's what he's saying here. He says it's not final. That the Jews and the Gentiles, it doesn't matter. He has spent the better part of 11 chapters of Romans trying to get the Jews to understand you're no better than the Gentiles. The Gentiles aren't any better than you. Right. We're no better than anybody else. We're all human. Amen. We're all the same. I know we like to have our differences of, I got more money than that person, or I'm smarter than that person, or I'm this, or I'm that, or whatever. But it don't matter. Okay? Well, some of those things may be possibly true. It don't matter. We're all God's children. We were all created by God. Are we going to accept the gift of salvation that He offers to every one of us? Salvation through Christ's death, burial, and resurrection is open to every human being. Does not matter. Right. And I know some people get hung up on the whole, well, there was a selection, and where God has already decided who he's going to accept and who he's not. No, God accepts everybody. God knows, because He's knows all things, and He's throughout all time. He knows who's going to accept and who's not. And that's where that falls in. He knows whether or not you're going to accept.
It's not that He picked.
It's not that He picked. Yeah. Exactly. It's not that He picked. It's that He knows which, because it's our choice. It's our choice. Because that wouldn't be it wouldn't be right of God to, all right, yep, I'm picking, like He's picking a sports team. I'm picking Gwen, but I'm not picking Hank. I mean, sorry, Hank. So, but I mean, it's, yeah. I mean, it's God doesn't work that way. God doesn't work that in, like he's picking who's going to play on the kickball team in school or something like that. I mean, it's, or whatever. It's, because it's God wants everybody to come and to join Him. He wants, and He says that He wants for nobody to perish, but it's our choice. And then He wants us to be telling others, and to be inviting others, and to be bringing the message out to others. Okay? How many of you invited somebody for today?
Sorry. Well, I invited people, but it was last minute.
Okay.
That's up there.
Yeah? Okay. You people going to come?
No.
No?
That's right.
No? Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. I invited too. There's several people at work I invited. Now, I will say this. If I know that they have their own home church, I didn't target those people so much. I talked to some people, whatever, but I tried to talk to people that I work with that aren't going to church, that aren't involved in church, because I don't want to steal from other churches.
Right, because people ask are involved, you know.
Right.
I mean,
Exactly. And stuff. And, you know, and that's fine if you talk to other people, relatives or friends or whatever, and they go to other churches, and that's fine. That's great. Okay. It's, you know, it's about inviting people.
You were the brave one to invite people to church. Yeah. They don't go to church because me and Savannah took the safe way.
Yeah.
We easy to invite them because we know they go to church.
Yeah.
And I started out with, I know you have your own church,
Right.
but
Right. Yeah.
we're the,
Yeah.
we're the brave ones.
That's
Yeah.
true because
So,
that's good.
right.
Just, I already know what they're gonna say, so it's just like
Yeah.
it's worth a shot.
Yeah. So, but the thing of it is, okay. So let's go back to my first initial question. Okay. We all invited somebody, but everybody in here feels that the people that they invited probably won't be here. So what's the difference between inviting people that have their own churches and people that don't go to church? You got the same result, right?
Oh, wow.
Sorry. but now that person that you invited that doesn't go to church knows that you're caring about them and would like to see them go to church, and you're interested in their salvation, right? And this, I'm sorry, but this can be, we should have, and yeah, we're not going to do big meal and everything else because we're going to wear our people out, but we should have invite a friend day 52 weeks of the year.
Anytime.
Exactly.
If they're not in church, that's any opportunity.
Or even invite a stranger.
Exactly. Invite a stranger. Yeah. I mean, yeah, exactly. So, and a lot of times it's easy. I mean, you know, yeah, it's easier to invite a stranger. You see somebody, you know, you invite the clerk at the grocery store, you invite the waitress or waiter at your restaurant that's waiting on you or whatever and stuff like that. That's easier sometimes than inviting people that we know that are right, that are home or that we work with and we got to face every day. Yeah, we, you know, that's, you know, but shouldn't we be including everybody? We just talked about how there's no difference between Jews, Gentiles, rich, poor, male, female. In God's eyes, we're all the same.
Right.
In God's eyes. And so shouldn't we be, you know, now I will say there was one guy that, you know, he said that he's involved in his own church and stuff like that. And I told him about it. I said, if you want to come, it'd be great and whatever. And he, you know, and stuff, but I didn't go out of my way, you know, like I said, I invited a few people, but I tried to invite, there's a guy at work that he doesn't go to church. He's out on the lake every Sunday. Well, he needs to come to church. He needs some God in his life. So I invited him. He kept telling me, you know, and it was it's really kind of weird because if you talk to the ones that are involved in their own church, yes, they're involved in their own church, but that gives them an easy out too. Whereas this guy kept kind of putting me off. Oh, I got to check with my girlfriend, see what she's doing. Come on, both of you, come on. I'm inviting both of you. Let's go. Come on. And well, I got to see what and kind of kept putting me off and whatever and stuff like that. Even when I talked to him Friday, so he called me, even when I was off, he called me about something on Friday. And I said, you come to church Sunday? He's like, oh, I got to check with Megan. I said, you said you were checking with Megan 3 days ago. When are you going to check? I said, do you not talk to her? I said, what kind of relationship you got with your girlfriend and you don't talk to her? You know, and stuff. And so, you know, but yeah, so I mean, but, you know, it kind of, you know, yeah, but if you keep asking them and you keep talking to them, then they know where you stand. And so, you know, and we want more people to be in that relationship with God. And so, so it's great that we all invited some people and wanted them to come and everything. And I'm not dogging that. I'm not putting anybody down for who you invited. Okay. I'm not, but but just, I'm also not trying to clean somebody else's pews out to fill ours. So, okay. So if they're getting fed at their church, then great. As long as they're getting fed at their church and they're growing in their relationship with God, that's what matters. Okay. I don't care where you go to church, as long as yes, I'd like to see you come here. But if you're getting fed at your church and it's good feeding, then stay there. Right. And I'm not talking this wonderful smelling food we got in the place now. Okay. I'm talking the spiritual food. If you're getting that spiritual food, then great. So, and that's what Paul's talking about here. He's talking about that it's not final. It's not final until the very last breath of your life. You can come back to God. You can come to God. Okay? But once that last breath is taken or Christ returns, it's done. And we don't know when that's going to be. So do we have a heart to try to tell people and to let them know that, hey, you need God. You need God. And so that's what we should be telling them. And that's what he's saying here. He's saying that, and he's telling them not to become arrogant and not to become thinking that they're, what's the big word we use now? Entitlement. You're not entitled to salvation because of anything you did. Okay? It's because God had the grace to give everybody the opportunity for salvation. And so don't be boasting and thinking that it's because you're all that. You ain't all that. Right? You ain't all that.
Why do you keep looking at me when you make those?
I'm just looking around. You got something on your mind, you need to confess and deal with God on it. But I'm just looking around. I keep looking over. I'm looking at Linda Mackey too, because she keeps laughing. So like, okay. So, but I mean, it's, so I didn't single you out. I singled Gwen and Hank out earlier. So, so, but
Trying to look at the camera.
no, I'm just looking around. So, all right. But that's what he's talking about here in the middle part of chapter 11 in these verses. Is he's saying here that salvation he's representing it here with the olive tree, and that the Gentiles were part of a wild olive tree, but that they have been grafted into God's olive tree, and that they just as much as easily as we're grafted in, that they were grafted in, they can be grafted out if they're not living and following, and they don't mean it. If they don't mean it. I think that's what I was trying to get to earlier when I was talking about a change of heart. When you come to Christ, you need to have a change of heart. You need to spend time in building that relationship. You need to change your heart. Okay, everybody says, yeah, God doesn't require anything of us. Yeah, he does. He requires us to care about him and to spend time with him. Yeah, it's not by works. It's not by having to keep the law. But it is about that relationship, building that relationship with God. And so that's what he's saying here. He's saying if you're not, if you don't have that change of heart and you don't show appreciation and that you care, then are you going to be part of the tree? And another way to look at it is your name going to be written in the Lamb's Book of Life on the last day? Or is Jesus going to look at you and say, depart from me, I never knew you? And that's not something I want to hear.
Right.
Not at all. And so, all right. Encourage you, I didn't get to it, but I encourage you to read John 15, talking about the vine dresser, and how God prunes that vine. basically, Paul's saying the same thing here, is that God's going to prune off the unproductive parts of the olive tree. He'll prune them off, and but they can always be put back. God can always put them back on, graft them back in. So I encourage you to read John 15 and see that, and it'll coincide with this. I didn't get to it today, but all right. And just remember, as you're going through your week and stuff, that remember that there's people out there that need to hear about God.
It covers a little more about what happens with those branches that don't make it.
It does,
Yeah.
yes,
Those are those people that
yes.
don't make it.
that don't come back in time. That don't come back. I mean, Jesus doesn't talk about putting them back onto the vine, but Paul's talking about it here, but that we have that choice until the very end. Okay? But if we don't make that choice, we don't choose, then yes, Jesus is very clear as to what happens. And a lot of it has to do with fire.
Yeah.
So, and again, it's, apart from me, I never knew you. It's not something I want to hear from God. So, any comments, thoughts, questions? I make that clear. I know that the reading of it that I did was not clear at all, but did I help clear it up for people? Okay. All right. So